Some of you may remember earlier this year, I made a big deal about Governor Whitmer and her administration rating the teachers' pension system. It didn't really make any headlines statewide. Um, COVID was going on, and that was taking a lot of the headlines. Also, the mainstream media is just not going to give any negative attention to Governor Whitmer. So, what I want to do today is go through all of the documents and evidence that shows exactly what happened and to definitively prove that yes, Governor Whitmer did steal money out of the state teachers' retirement system. So it's best to start here with a bill I introduced late in 2017, and it was actually signed into law late in 2018. It's House Bill 5355. I'm going to skip ahead to page 11 of this bill because this is where the relevant section when it comes to what happened this year with the rating of the pension system. This is pretty technical. I'm going to try to make it as simple as possible. There's a thing called the payroll growth assumption, and it's something that people don't really pay much attention to, but really it was way out of whack. When I started, the payroll growth assumption was 3.5%, and it was way overstated. There hasn't been that type of payroll growth in a long time, decades, in the state of Michigan. And what this was doing was it was forcing us to overestimate how much money we would put into the system, and it would really just kick the can down the road, and it would force us to put a lot more money into the pension system later on. So essentially, we were forcing our kids to pay the bill for stuff that should have been paid today. What this bill did is it required that the payroll growth assumption be lowered by 0.5% every year, starting with the fiscal year ending September 30, 2022, which would be next fiscal year, and it would lower it by 0.5% until it reached zero. And when it reaches zero, that's really, you think of your home mortgage or your car payment, it's the same amount every month, and that's really what a 0% payroll growth assumption is. It's much more sustainable, and it's much more realistic. So that's where it started. I'm going to move over to, this is just the language that was there for the bill. This is what it really looked like. This is the fiscal analysis that the House provided. If you look at the dark red line in this chart, that's what is likely would have happened if we wouldn't have made any changes. So as you see in that dark red line, we are underpaying every year, and then eventually we backdate all these payments, and we would have ended up paying $6 billion annually in the year 2039 into the pension system. And to put that in perspective, this year I think we had about $14.5 billion that went into the school aid fund as a whole. So you're looking at easily 30 to 40% of the entire school aid revenue could have gone just to be making our debt payment for the pension system. What this bill did, there's all these lines here, but if you look at this red line here where it levels off, this dotted line, it leveled off. That was the payroll growth assumption each year getting phased down to zero. And once it came to zero, it leveled off, and it leveled off at about $4 billion a year. So that's what the intent of the bill is. What's important, I'm going to go back to this language of the bill. What's very, very important here is there's no fixed values. It doesn't say in the year ending in September 30th, 2022, that we start at 3.5% and we go to 3. Nope, it just says you lower it by 0.5%. There's no fixed values in here, and that's really, really important. All right, we have another document here that's important to look at. Every 5 years, the pension system comes out with an experience study, and they look and they basically check all of their assumptions. Have our assumptions really matched up to what we thought they were going to do? And here, I'm skipping ahead here to the part where it talks about the payroll growth assumption. And it says that the decline in the MPSERS active population is the primary factor in the realized payroll growth. So what they're saying here is, look, there's a lot less teachers, there's a lot less students, there's just not the payroll growth that was expected. And then here it says that GRS, and that's the actuaries that go through all this, the really, really smart people that check all these numbers, their preferred assumption is zero. So the actuaries, the ones who are auditing this system and making sure that everything's in line are making a recommendation that the payroll growth is 0. They do put this qualifier in here saying that if the board and the Department of Technology Management and Budget expect that active membership was not going to continue to decline, that they could be okay with the payroll growth assumption matching the wage inflation assumption of 2.75%. There's just not really any quantitative evidence to show that we're going to all of a sudden see a stop in the decline of students and teachers over the next few years. So there's really not even a mathematical justification for there being a payroll growth assumption greater than 0 right now. The next document we have here is, it's actually from the MPSERS board. They approved these actuarial assumptions, and this happened on May 24th of 2018. So the board actually adopted this before my bill I talked about earlier, House Bill 5355. This was adopted by the MPSERS board before that bill was signed into law. So if you go down to number 3 here, it says reduce the payroll growth and wage inflation assumptions from 3.5% to 2.75%. And it's important to make note that these changes will be effective October 1, 2017. So it's a bit confusing because there's a 3-year lag. So really, these assumptions should have taken effect for this current fiscal year that we're in right now. So the fiscal year of 2020-2021. We're going to find out that that's not the case, but that's what should have happened. And this assumption was adopted by the MPSERS board at that point in time on May 24th, 2018. What we have here is the board minutes, the MPSERS board minutes from July of 2018. Keep in mind at this point in time, I'm working on this House Bill 5355. I've been involved in some pretty big MPSERS reforms that term, and nobody from the Office of Retirement Services or the MPSERS board has reached out to me. No one from the administration has reached out to me to let me know that this changes was made. I did find out later that summer that the change had been made. But so I'm going to go through the minutes here real quick, and there's some executive secretary comments. So the executive secretary, Carrie Vandenbosch, welcomed Jeff Mills to the board. She also advised that Public Act 181 was signed into law, and that bill overrides the board's adoption of the 2.75% payroll growth assumption as part of the experience study. Instead, the payroll growth assumption will remain at 3.5% for the FY 17 and 18 valuations. And then it will gradually phase down 0.5% per year starting with the FY 19 valuation until it reaches 0. First off, this is nonsense. And once I found out about it, I actually didn't even find out about this until February of 2019. So it was another 6 months before I even found out that ORS was going to basically ignore their own payroll growth assumption that was validly adopted by the MPSERS board in May of 2018, and they were just going to do whatever they wanted. So once I did find out that ORS, the MPSERS board, Governor Whitmer were all planning to ignore what was the properly adopted payroll growth assumption, I requested an opinion from the Attorney General's office to seek clarification on this. Basically, I asked the Attorney General's office hey, can you look at this payroll growth assumption, because I do not think the administration is following it properly. And when you know it, in January 24th, I actually received this letter a few days later. I received it on January 28th, 2020. I got a response from the Attorney General's office. I couldn't believe it. And what this letter basically says is Representative Albert is correct. I'm going to go down, I'm going to skip through this, but I'm just going to go down to the conclusion paragraph. It kind of summarizes everything. And it basically says that the law that the MPSERS board and the administration was pointing to does not restrict the Michigan Public School Employee Retirement Board and the director of DTMB from adopting, after consultation with the state treasurer and the system's actuary, the changes in the payroll growth rate assumptions prior to the yearly mandated reductions that begin with the state fiscal year ending in September 30, 2022. This is the most important line here at the end. The payroll growth assumption set by the board and the DTMB director in May 2018 stands unless it is changed by the board and the DTMB director or reduced pursuant to the statute there that's mentioned. So that's all the evidence that I have, and it pretty definitively shows that the payroll growth assumption was lowered from 3.5 to 2.75, and that the administration was not going to adhere to the law. Once they were proven wrong, unfortunately, on June 10th of this year, 2020, the board voted to change the payroll growth assumption from 2.75 back to 3.5. Now, the reason I showed the information from the experience study was to prove that there is no actuarial, no mathematical basis, no common sense explanation to raise the payroll growth assumption at all. It makes no sense. It simply is stealing money from our future, from our kids, and it's completely unfair. So what does this all mean in dollars and cents? Well, I can't give you a definitive answer on that, but I can tell you this year, this fiscal year, if we were to have adhered to the proper 2.75% payroll growth assumption, the pension system would have had an additional deposit of $166 million. That's just this year. And keep in mind, there would have been additional deposits for the next 5 to 7 years, depending on how long it took to get to zero. So all of those deposits are now not going to be made. And additionally, all of those investment returns that those deposits would have made no longer are going to exist. So what does that mean? So if we would have put $166 million into the pension system this year, that money would have been invested and earned a return going forward. So we have now lost billions of dollars that will need to be paid in the future. This is billions of dollars that could have been used to educate our kids, and what we have seen is completely unfair. I made this video just to basically to document what happened. It's received virtually no attention statewide. The other thing that really bothers me is earlier this year in the State of the State address in January of, I think it was January or February of this year, Governor Whitmer actually had the audacity to accuse the Republicans in the legislature for attempting to steal teachers' pension money. And then she has the audacity 6 months later to do exactly what she was falsely accusing the Republican legislature of doing. So I just want to get this information out there. Please keep this information in mind. I'm going to do everything I can going forward to make sure that we don't have our teachers' money stolen from them. That's money they work for, that's money they earn. And I also want to make sure that our kids are not left with this giant bill. I want to make sure we're on solid footing and that we have sustainable finances going forward. So thank you and God bless.